A huge thank you for taking time out of your schedules and your summers to be here today for Abby and I, and it really means a lot to us. And I love that song that Teresa sang because, that is really my story. Every closed door, every broken relationship, every year of waiting in my life are all the things that led me down the path to Abby, and I would not trade that for anything. So I want to go back a little bit and share a little bit about what's happened in the last couple of years to me, because it really has been a miraculous journey. A few years ago, I was really aware of two things in my life that weren't right. One was a lot of unbelief, and the other was a lot of fear. And I knew that the Bible says that those that come to God need to believe that He is, and that without faith it's impossible to please Him, because those who come to God must believe that He is, and that He's a rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. And I had no problem believing for other people. I could pray up a storm for other people and believe for them. But for my own life, there were just huge question marks of, God, why? There's been one dream, one desire, one passion through my whole life, and that's to be a mom. And as year after year went by, I just could not understand, why that wasn't going to happen. And I remember my sister saying to me on more than one occasion, you're in the middle of a story, and there's more chapters yet to come, and you can't make a judgment right now because you don't know the end of the story. But in my heart, I felt like it was the end. And especially as I was approaching my 40th birthday, I just had, people talk about a biological clock ticking. Well, mine was more like San Onofre nuclear reactor power plant going beam, beam, beam. I had this constant feeling all the time of sand running through an hourglass, and it was getting down to the very end. And I also had this constant sensation of a sun setting, and it was just about to go down. And I just remember thinking, God, I'm reaching an age where I won't be able to have children, and that's my one dream. And one day I was out to lunch with a friend of ours from right here at church, and I was sharing some of these things with her, and she said, have you ever considered adoption? And that was the most foreign thing in the world to me. I just looked at her like, what? And I had always had a heart for orphanage, always had a passion for children that were in third world countries. That had been a lifelong thing. But I had never considered that as a single person, I could become a mom. I had an ideal in my mind that you got married and you had children, and hopefully your husband could afford to have you stay home and stay with the kids. And, I was opposed to daycare. I was opposed to working moms, all that. And it took me over the next 2 years a lot of wrestling and wrangling, and a lot of it happened late at night. I couldn't sleep. And the stacks around my bed of books about international adoptions and orphans and things just kept piling up, and I'd be laying there tossing and turning with these books all around me, and as I kept coming up with different things to tell God, I don't have the money, I don't have the time and energy, I can't do this by myself, it's too hard. The one thing, and then I also had a balance of, this would never be fair to a child, to have a mom that has to work, to not have a dad, to not have a whole family structure. And the thing I kept coming back to over and over was anything that I could offer a child would be so much better than what they had in an orphanage. And the more I read about the situations in China, the more I realized, if all I could do was give this child a warm bowl of oatmeal and a hug every day, it would be better than what they had. And so around that same time, a friend of mine had just adopted, and I was at her baby shower, and I was holding her baby, and this overwhelming love that I've never experienced before just filled up my heart for this child. And from that time on, over the next 2 years, I was just crying every other minute. I just felt this big, huge stretching in my heart of God making a place. And I kept praying over and over, Lord, I don't know what you're doing. Do you want me to adopt a child? Do you want me to talk to other families that they should adopt a child? Do you want me to go work in an orphanage? What is it that you're doing in me? And I really felt like God kept saying the answer is D, all of the above, and start with adopting a child. And so I had lots and lots of fear, but as I started researching things, I remember one day I went onto a website that ended up becoming my adoption agency. And the minute I clicked on that website and it opened up, this little bell just started ringing in my heart. This is the pathway to your daughter. And so I found out there's a quota for singles adopting from China, and that was that 8% of the adoptions could be single people. So for every 100 families, they could take 8 single people. And the way it worked with my agency, a lot of the agencies I had contacted had waiting lists that were 3 and 4 years long. The way it was with my agency, they had an essay kind of contest or whatever you will call it every November where people submitted essays and they chose from that pool. This was in December when I found the website, and they had just chosen in November for the following year. But I felt so strongly that this was the place and that this was the direction to go that I went to a meeting they were holding, and I remember the day of the meeting, I went thinking I'll just learn more so that next year when I write my essay I'll know more about it. And the day I woke up to go to the meeting, it was pouring rain. I mean, just you couldn't even see more than a couple of feet in front of you. And this meeting was going to be in Pasadena. And again, my fear, I was just terrified to drive across Los Angeles in the rain. And I remember, wrestling this out and this thought coming into my mind of, if you can't drive across Los Angeles in the rain, what makes you think you're going to be able to fly over to China and get a baby? So I pulled myself up and I drove through the rain and I went. And at the end of the meeting, I went up and talked to one of the directors, and I told her a little bit about my situation. And she said, we just had someone drop out of the program that we had selected for this year, and we don't keep waiting lists. And if you'll fax me all your information tomorrow, we'll consider you. And as I drove back from that meeting that day, the sun had come out, and there was just rainbow after rainbow after rainbow the whole way back, like 7 rainbows. And I was like, okay, God, I think you're making a way for me. And it was one of those things that ended up happening many times. If you're old enough to remember Get Smart, which probably most of you aren't, but it was a show a long time ago, and these guys would be walking, and all of a sudden these doors would just slide open in a wall. And I remember my sister sharing that with me, and that's how I felt. I would go up to these walls that looked like there's no way around this, and all of a sudden they would just open up and I would go through. And so that week I sent in my application and wrote out a huge check, and it really felt like jumping out of an airplane. I just had this sick feeling for like 3 days. And before all this started to happen, I used to think if you were doing something that God had for you, you just feel peaceful and great and everything. Now I can tell you, there are a lot of things when you are on the right path, and it will be terrifying and as hard as anything you've ever done. And so I sent in my check thinking I have no idea where I'm going to get the money for this. An international adoption can cost a huge amount of money. This one was going to cost about $20,000, of which I did not have. And I just felt like God saying, just step forward and I'll make a way for you. And I also want to say that, leading up to that time before the agency, I didn't just strike out on my own. The first thing I did was, I met with my pastors, who happened to be my sister and brother-in-law. I met with them and talked it over, and then I also met with a lady in our church who, she's had many, many years. She's in her 80s, and I remember I said, I want to meet with you and talk to you about something that's on my heart. And as I drove to meet her for breakfast that day, I was listening to the radio, and there was a radio program about this family that was adopting their 5th child from China. And this child that they were adopting had no arms. And they were just sharing what God had done in their hearts and their lives through these children. And I was bawling, so by the time I met with her at the restaurant, I was already kind of wiped out. And I remember sharing everything with her and pouring out my heart, and she just said, "Christi, this is God, just go for it." And so from there, I launched out. I was accepted into the program, and a month or two later, I ended up going to another conference they had on Chinese adoption. And at that conference, they had a time where they had door prizes, and they were giving away diaper bags and books and different things, and they had 25 different prizes they were doing, and they called my name, and I won a book, and I was all excited. And then it got down to the 25th prize, and they called my number again out of this huge group of people, and I thought, how do they have my ticket again? And they said, we're going to give you $1,000 towards your adoption. And so that was the first step of God saying, you just keep stepping out, and I'm going to meet you every point along the way, which he did. About that same time, I had gone to the orthodontist because my front tooth was getting a little bit out of place, and I wanted to get a retainer for it. And over the next many months, I went on to, from the orthodontist, they had taken an x-ray before they did the retainer, and they said, there's a radiolucency, there's a shadow up on the bone up above your tooth, and we want you to go on and see an oral surgeon and get a better x-ray. So I did that, and then the oral surgeon said to me, this shadow or radiolucency is going up, and I can't tell how high up, if it's going into your sinus or not. You need a CAT scan. And at that point, things got very, very difficult with my insurance. They did not want me to have a CAT scan, and it turned into such a nightmare, I can't even tell you. It was not a normal situation. It was a spiritual hellhole. And it got to the point where they have this certain agency that handles these things for my insurance, and there's this secret medical review team that makes these decisions, and you can't know their names and you can't know their location, but I knew the name of the company. And I had a friend here from church that I had shared things with that was praying for me, and she called me one day at lunchtime and she said, "Christi, I'm in this parking lot, and there's the name of this place that's handling your insurance things." And so I jumped in my car and drove down there, and I said to the receptionist, "I need a CT scan, and I'm not leaving here today until I see someone." And she was like, "Well, you can't see anybody, and we don't talk to people, and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "I'm not leaving." So I waited 2 to 3 hours. I sat there, and finally it was closing time, and they sent somebody out, and they said, "Miss, we're closing." And I said, I'm not leaving. And they finally said, "Well, we're going to have to call security and have them escort you out." And I said, "Well, then I am calling the media, because I need a CT scan, and I'm not leaving here until you guys agree to give me one." And so they finally said, "Okay, you can go to this gatekeeper doctor that they have, and if he says you need a CT scan, even though all their other doctors already said I did, then you can have one." So I took Bob with me to the gatekeeper doctor meeting, and immediately the guy said, "You need a CT scan." So I got my CT scan, and it took weeks to get it back. Doctors were on vacation and things, but when I finally met with them, they said, "Your whole sinus is completely filled with something and completely blocked, and you're going to need to take this a step further." And so what the insurance wanted me to do, they sent me to an oral surgeon, and they told me that they thought it was what's called an OKC tumor. It's a really destructive but benign tumor that eats away at bone. And they said, you're going to have this removed. And the oral surgeon wanted to do it right there in his office under, just an outpatient basis. And in the meantime, while I've been fighting the insurance, I had starting to go to doctors on my own. I was just going to pay out of pocket, but they were so nice. Several doctors just had mercy on me and saw me for free. And the doctors outside of the insurance told me, "You need to be in a hospital, you need to have an ENT and an oral surgeon. This is how this needs to be approached." And so then I was stuck. It was going to be about $20,000, and I could either go through the insurance and they would pay for everything, or I could go out on my own. And after going through that whole dilemma, I decided to go with the insurance and just do it in his office. But this really horrible feeling came over me, and I can't really explain it to you. It's not a depression. It's an oppression. It was a spiritual darkness. It was just a sense of evil and foreboding and gloom. And one of the difficult things was I had been so excited. I had just sent all my paperwork to China. I had been on cloud 9. During the month of July, before I got this CT scan, I was just floating like a balloon. I mean, people had to hold me down. And I had this secret joy. It felt like a baby bird's nest where some little eggs have been laid and nobody knows about it. And I would be going in grocery stores thinking, they don't know I'm pregnant, but I'm going to have a baby from China. And I couldn't hold it back. I just wanted to tell everybody, you know, this wonderful thing is happening. And at the same time, all this other stuff started happening. And so as I went into this surgery, shortly before that, I had some people from church, some guys that were going to come over and do all this baby proofing on my house. And they were going to put in gates and locks, and I was all excited about it. But around the same time, this horror just started to come over me that I knew something horrible was heading my way. And I remember the day of thinking, I shouldn't have them come put locks. I know this, whatever this is in my mouth and face, it's something horrible. And I just felt like that push of this is another step of faith you have to take. Come have them put in the baby locks. Come have them do it. And that day, one of the guys' wives said, I want to come over with you and spend time with you while they're there. And I was like, no, don't come. I'm not doing good. I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to be alone. And she was like, I really feel like I'm supposed to come. And I was like, no, don't come. Well, she came. and I told her everything. And she said, Christi, I know you're going to be okay. She said, I wouldn't say this, but I know in my heart you are going to be okay. So I went ahead and had the surgery. And I had said before the surgery to the doctor, what if this is cancer? And he said, I will be able to see immediately, and I will close you right back up, and I will send you straight to UCLA, and that'll be that. And so after I had the surgery, the next day I met with him, and he said, it was an OKC tumor, and it was very destructive, and it went up under your nose, and it went from this tooth all the way back here, and I had to do a lot to get it all out. And so he said, do you want your tissue just sent to the normal lab, or do you want to pay extra and have it sent to UCLA? And I said, I want to have it sent to UCLA. So 2 weeks later, and I kept calling and bugging him, and it just kept stretching out, and they kept stalling and telling me he'll get the results soon. Finally, on August 25th, 2005, it was my sister's birthday. My dad was in from out of town, and our whole family was going out to a big dinner. And I got a call from the doctor's office, and they said, you need to come in and you need to bring a family member with you because we have a lot of information to go over with you. So my sister drove me to the doctor's office, and as he talked with us, he started sharing that it was a malignant tumor. And both Cynthia and I were just in a complete state of shock. I remember Cynthia saying, do you mean cancer? And he's like, yes, I mean malignant, I mean cancer. And I couldn't even stand up. I was trying to stand up because I felt like I needed to throw up in the sink. And I was going to pass out. And he said, I've already called UCLA. We're going to get you in there in a couple of days. They're going to need to do another surgery to go back in and get clear margins, which he didn't get into what clear margins meant, and I'm glad he didn't because I could barely take what he was saying. And we went home that night, and I mean, it was horrible. It was my sister's birthday, and I ended up curled up in a fetal position and didn't leave her house for 3 days, didn't eat, didn't sleep. And the worst part of it all was knowing that I had lost my adoption. Part of adopting from China involves going to your doctor and having all kinds of blood work done and all kinds of paperwork filled out with a notary present in the exam room to say that there is nothing wrong with you. And I felt like after all those years and after all that hope, it was like a miscarriage. It was like I'm devastated beyond words. And I remember after a couple of days, my sister and I had found a website of a woman that had this extremely rare cancer. It's less than 1% of all cancers. It's called chondrosarcoma. a woman that had had this cancer, and she gave her phone number and address on the website, and she was from a small town that we used to live in, so we called her. And that conversation with her was my first ray of hope in the darkness. She had had this cancer for 40 years and had fought it and had surgeries all over her body. And she said cancer survivors are like soldiers that have been through war, and they have scars, and they are survivors. And talking to her, I had been in such a place of utter darkness. It was like, you see these mining accidents on TV. I was like down in a mine, and talking to her was like hearing the tap, tap, or the microphone dropping in, and somebody talking to me down in there saying, "You're going to get out of here. You can come out." And I really at that point hadn't thought that I could. And so the next day we went down to, this had all happened on a Thursday. It was a Monday, and my dad had extended his stay, and my whole family went with me to UCLA, and I was so prepared to go straight into surgery. I packed my bags and had my bag ready. We couldn't drive or anything. We had to have Kathy drive us because we were a nervous wreck. And as we talked to the surgeon and he shared things, he said, to get clear margins, really what that means, we need to take out the roof of your mouth, your teeth, your bone over here. You could lose your eye. We later, as we were reading things, found out I could lose my nose too. And as he described the whole surgery, my head was just spinning, and I remember leaving his office and my family being really happy because they felt like there was hope that the cancer could be removed. And I remember feeling like, I don't want to live. I don't want to live without a baby. I don't want to live with cancer. I don't want to live. And I remember thinking and starting to pray then without sharing with anybody else, that praying and hoping I could die on the operating table because I didn't want to face what was in front of me. And on that day that we were at UCLA, our whole church here had a day of fasting and prayer, and people took the day off work, and people came here and met and fasted and prayed for me. And the next day I got a call from the oral pathologist at UCLA who's been there 30 years and never talks with patients, only with doctors. He spent about an hour with me on the phone, and he said, "Christi, we're changing your diagnosis to another equally bizarre and rare cancer called chondroid chordoma that is, again, less than 1% of all cancers, and that is usually a skull-based tumor." And when he shared that, though, it was like a crack in the diagnosis for me. And I realized, as they were changing things, wait a minute, they're not sure about this. And they were having so many doctors look at it. And I was scheduled to have surgery there within a week to have that whole surgery. But my family really insisted that I get a second opinion. So I flew down to MD Anderson, which is a cancer hospital in Texas. And I spent a week there, and at that point, there became concerns with the kind of cancer they were saying it was, that wasn't the primary site, that may be a secondary site, and that there may be tumors in my skull or spine. So all day, every day, I was just drinking dyes and going through tubes, and my church family had loaded up an iPod with praise music and made all these scripture cards for me to read, and you know what? God met me every point of the way there. I remember there was a day where I went in to see the plastic surgeon, and they're taking all these photographs of my face and making molds of my mouth and teeth and things. And as I walked into his office, the secretaries had a big whiteboard behind their desk, and they put up a quote every day. And the quote they had put up was Hebrews 11:1 that says, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." And God continued to meet me there the whole way through. And the last night before I was going to leave there, I remember being in my hotel room by myself, and I have to tell you, it really felt like it was me and the devil. And it was just a spiritual battle. I can't explain it, but I reached a point where I said out loud, "I'm never turning my back on God, and I'm going the whole way with God." And at that point, that evil presence that had been with me really left. And the next day when I met with the doctor, he said, Christi, you are in a gray area. We're not sure what this is, but we can't take any chances. We have to take it all out. And they wanted to do an 18-hour surgery and take a bone out of my leg and veins out of my arm and try to rebuild a roof of my mouth, and I wasn't going to have any teeth or anything for a year. I'd have to go live down in Texas. And so we set up the surgery with them, and I told them I need to fly back to UCLA where they're having a meeting. And I found out later that night that I had been in my hotel room having that battle. Someone here in California later told me they had woken up in the night and felt so strongly impressed to pray for me, had gotten out of bed and gotten on the floor on their knees, were praying for me, ended up waking up their husband, getting him out of bed, getting him on the floor, praying for me, and they prayed until they really felt a breakthrough. And I really do believe something broke at that point. At the same time, we had been consulting with doctors at the Mayo Clinic, doctors here, and there was a doctor here in Westlake that told me, she said, Christi, this is a gray area, the exact same words that I had heard at MD Anderson. And she said, you need to get as many people involved as you can. And when I shared that with my sister, she found a verse that she gave to me, and I want to share it with you all. It's in Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 41. It starts at verse 9. It says, I took you from the ends of the earth, from its farthest corners I called you. I said you are my servant. I have chosen you and have not rejected you. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. All who rage against you will surely be ashamed and disgraced. Those who oppose you will be as nothing and perish. Though you search for your enemies, you will not find them. Those who wage war against you will be as nothing at all. For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. Do not be afraid, O worm, O Jacob, O little Israel, for I myself will help you, declares the Lord your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. See, I will make you into a threshing sledge, a new and sharp instrument with many teeth. You will thresh the mountains and crush them, and reduce the hills to chaff. You will winnow them, and the wind will pick them up, and a gale will blow them away. But you will rejoice in the Lord and glory in the Holy One of Israel. And I remember asking a friend, I said, it's so weird. It says, I'll make you into a threshing sledge with new and sharp teeth. I'm like, that is just strange. And I remember her saying to me, because she had had this verse really on her heart at one point in her life, and she said, what God had showed her through it was that the travail of battle will form you into a weapon. And I really believe that through everything I went through, God completely changed who I am as a person. And another verse that went along with it, that one was in Jeremiah 30, and it's verse 16, and it says, but all who devour you will be devoured. All your enemies will go into exile. Those who plundered you will be plundered. All who make a spoil of you I will despoil, but I will restore you to health and heal your wounds, declares the Lord. And at that time, someone from here at church had been praying for me, and she came up to me, and she didn't know what these doctors had been telling me or the details, but she came up to me and she said, Christi, I just have this picture in my mind, and she said, you're standing and you've got a tapestry in your hand. And there's this really dark thread running through it, and you are completely focused on that dark thread. And God is saying to you, that thread looks black, but it's not really black. When my light shines on it, it's going to turn iridescent like the aurora borealis lights. And when she said that, after hearing these doctors, talk about things being gray now, we had gone from black to gray, and I remember Cynthia had told me, she really felt like God was saying, as His light comes into this situation, the darkness is going to be gone. And I flew back from MD Anderson. Before I was going to have my surgery there, I was going to come back here for what's called a tumor review board. And I was scheduled for surgery here as well, and I told my doctor I'm not going to have the surgery here. I'm going to go to Texas. And he said, I want to leave your surgery spot. They're so hard to get. Let's leave it in place until we get through the tumor review board. So we had the tumor review board, and it's an all-day process with 40 or 50 doctors, and your things are up on a widescreen projection, and they're all discussing it. And at the end of the day, they came in and met with me, and they said, Christi, there's a modicum of uncertainty as to really what this is. Let's use your surgery spot tomorrow morning and go in and do another biopsy and take more bone and more tissue. And at the same time, I had found a website for Harvard who had proton beam radiation, which was one of the very few places in the world you could get treatment for this rare cancer. And on their website, they had stated that 37% of the pathology they see has been misdiagnosed on these two rare cancers that they specialize in. And so I ended up having the surgery the next day. It was really scary because not everybody had heard that I wasn't having my mouth taken out. And when I walked, I'm laying there in the bed looking up on the whiteboard, and it says Wyrrick saddle block. And I'm like, I'm not getting a saddle block, and we're not taking anything out of my legs, and I want to wake up with my teeth and everything. And so they did the surgery. And about 2 weeks later, and really by that point, I knew I didn't have cancer anymore. When I left MD Anderson, when I walked out of the doors that day, I just knew I don't have cancer anymore. And 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from my surgeon at UCLA, and he said, do you want the good news or the good news? And I said, I want the good news. And he said, we sent your tissue to Harvard, and it's benign. And I got off the phone with him, and I got down on my face on the floor and was just crying and weeping and thanking God. And as I did, I began coughing, and a huge mass moved out of my sinuses and down the back of my throat, and I began coughing and coughed out. I'm sorry to get so gross and graphic, but it's part of my story. Coughed out this huge mass of stuff. And I wish I could go on more, but I want to wrap up with things about Abby because we only have a couple of minutes left. Throughout that year, many more things happened. And at the end of it all, I was within 3 weeks of my paperwork expiring to be able to adopt Abby. And the wait from China had just extended and extended. And I knew if my paperwork expired, I could never get reapproved to have her. So I was panicking every moment, but finally, on August 25th, a year to the day that I was diagnosed with cancer, on the exact same day, on my sister's birthday, I got a call from my agency, and they emailed me Abby's picture and said, we have a baby for you. And God so redeemed that day for me. That had been the most horrible day of my life, and it became the most wonderful seeing her face. But that was not the end of the bumpy roads. I was then told that there were some concerns about Abby and that she might be mentally retarded. And I sent all her paperwork to Angelina Jolie's baby doctor, who only does international adoptions, and it cost a lot of money, but I sent it there, and they said, you know what, this is not a normal China adoption, this is not a normal baby referral, and we have very serious concerns. Her head was too small at birth, and there's a lot of other things, and there is a real chance that she is going to have some profound issues. And for the next couple of weeks, again, I had to battle through so much darkness. But at that point, I knew that was my daughter, no matter what. And I just got to the point of, you know what, if that's my assignment for the next 20 or 40 years, and she's got those issues, then she's got those issues, but that's my baby. And we now know that Abby is actually smarter than I am, by far, and that she has no cranial issues. And I feel like I've left a bunch out, but I want to save a few minutes at the end just to share some pictures with you so that you can get a taste of how wonderful things are for me every day. I'm like at Easter, I'm like, no, this is the best day I've ever had in my life. And then at Mother's Day, I'm like, no, this is the best day. And her birthday. And every event, I just keep thinking, this is the best day of my life. So Kathy's going to share some photos with you. Yes, I do. Let me share a couple more bits about the happily ever after. When I got home with Abby, about 3 weeks later, I was going through my mail, opening up my bills, and I mentioned that China adoption is $20,000. There's a $10,000 tax credit from the government. So in the end, it's $10,000. I was opening up my bills and mail one day and opened up a white envelope, and this was 3 weeks after I got home with her. There was a check for $10,000 from someone. So my adoption ended up costing me nothing. And I know God didn't let me know that until the end, because I needed to walk by faith. I look back now, and it's like one of those suspension bridges, except there's no foot places. And I look back and go, how did I cross that chasm? How did I get this baby? And yet God made it possible. So.
Christi, thank you so much.